Okie dokie. All right, Shabbat Shalom. Can you guys hear me okay? Good. Good. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Neil is away. Neil and Andrea went down to Florida, I think for the month, right, Ron? Yeah. Yeah. If anybody is deserving of it, it's you, Jerry. Don't you worry. You make yourself comfortable. It's very funny. All right. Everybody have an okay week? I hope. Mostly. Yeah, this is not the most pleasant of weather, that's for sure. Although, no, exactly. Right. Yesterday, walking around, it feels like it's summertime. Okay, again, as a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, this would have been considered summer, already for most of them. You'd be people in shorts. But I think those days where I was actually able to handle that kind of coldness, I think have escaped me at this point in my life. But look, people don't realize, upstate New York is in many cases colder than Wisconsin. You know, right, exactly. Well, Madison happens to be an isthmus, so it's basically a strip of land between two lakes, which means that no matter what direction you are walking in, you are walking into the wind. So that was always my experience, was whatever the temperature was, it was actually 60 degrees colder because you were walking straight on into it every week. Yeah. No, it's true. It's true that's a real thing. And in Minnesota, they built underground stuff so people to get from class to class, because at a certain point, human beings can only tolerate so much. But we're grateful that we're here and quite comfortable, I would say, in our temperature. At least I am up here. And wishing all of us that are here with us Shabbat Shalom, all of us that are watching at home a Shabbat Shalom. And we'll get started with our service together on page 120 as we light and bless our Shabbat candles. Again, page 120. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. We'll turn now to page 130 to begin our service together. Very top of the page, again, page 130. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena ladonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena ladonai. Naria, letzor yishenu nekad mafanav betodah. Naria, letzor yishenu bizmirot naria lo. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena ladonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena ladonai. We'll turn now to page 131, Shiru Ladonai, which is just in the middle of the page in Hebrew. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz, Shiru Ladonai Baruchu Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato, Shiru l'Adonai baruch hu shemo, basru meyom leyom Yeshuato. Shiru l'Adonai, shiru shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai baruch hu shemo, basru meyom leyom Yeshuato. Shiru l'Adonai baruch hu shemo, basru meyom leyom Yeshuato. We're now on page 132, or Zarua, which is in the Hebrew just at the very bottom of the page. Or Zarua lahatzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua lahatzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai, vehodu lezecher kodsho. Simechu tzadikim b'Adonai, vehodu lezecher kodsho. We're now on the top of page 134, Zamru l'Adonai, again, very top of the page. Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra, b'chatzotzrot vekol shofar, ha'ariu lifnei ha'melech Adonai, yiram hayamum lo, tevel veyoshvei ba. Neharot yimchahu chaf yachad harim yiraneinu, lifnei Adonai kiva, lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel betzedek, ve'amim mesharim. Yiram hayamum lo, tevel veyoshvei ba. Neharot yimchahu chaf yachad, harim yiraneinu. We're now on page 135, Romamu, which is just in the middle of the page in Hebrew. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu, romemu Adonai Eloheinu vehishtachavu lehar kodsho. We'll turn now to page 138 for Lechado D, which is again on the top of page 138. And a reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. And for the final one, for those that are with us here, we'll rise and face towards the rear of the room. Lechado di likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor vezachur bedibur echad, Ishmianu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, l'shem u'tiferet ve'litila. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Ki hi mekor haberhacha, Meher hoshmi kedem nesucha, Sof maase b'machshavat chila. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, ki ba'orech kumiori, uri shir daberi, kevod Adonai alaich nigla. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Mohi beshalom, ateret bala, gam besimcha uvetzola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kalam, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Okay, please be seated. We're now on page 140, Tzadikat Tamar, which is the Hebrew that indents just in the middle of the page. Tzadikat Tamar yifrach, Keres Babanon yizke, Shetulim beveit Adonai, Bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu, Od yenuvun beseba, Deshenim verananim Yehu lehagid, Ki ashar Adonai tzuri, velo hablata bohu. We'll rise for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144. Yitkadal veyitkadash shemei Rabbah, Be'alma divrach irutei be'amlich malchutei, B'chayechon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala, u'vizman kariv ve'imeru, Amen. Yeheshmei Rabbah mevarach, La'alam li'al me'almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, Shemei dekudsha brichu, Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, Tamihiran ve'halma ve'imeru. Amen. Remain standing for the Baruch Hu on page 146. Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach. Please be seated. We're now on page 148. We'll read together in English at the very bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens the gates, thoughtfully alters the time and changes the seasons, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzvaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdihil ben yom uvein lahaila, Adonai tzvahot shemo, El chai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'en, Baruch atah Adonai, Amahari barhabim. We'll turn now to page 150, and we'll read together in English at the bottom of the page. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down, when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Ki ehem chayenu ve'orech yameinu, v'hem negei yomav v'layla, v'havatcha al tasir mimenu li'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 154. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol meodecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha, Vishinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha b'derech, u'shochbecha u'vkumecha, u'kshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, u'chtavtam amizuzot beitecha u'vihisharecha. Leman tiskeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'item kedoshim le'elohechem, Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem mieretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem le'Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem emet. We'll read together now on the top of page 157 in English. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. As we turn to page 158, Michamocha at the very top. Yabai bye bim 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 bam, yabai bye bim bam, yabai bye bim 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 bam, yabai bye bim bam, yai bye ba 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 bye, yabai bye bim bam, yai bye ba 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 bye, yabai bye bim bam. Mi chamocha b'dim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Norat hiloto sefel, norat hiloto sefel, yabai bye bim 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 bam, yabai bye bim bam, yabai bye bim 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 bam, yabai bye bim bam, yai bye ba 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 bye, yabai bye bam bam, yai bye ba bim bam bam, yabai bye bim bam. Malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeam lifnei Moshe Miriam, Zeli anu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar kifad Adonai et Yaakov, ugolo miad chazak mimenu, Baruch ata Adonai, Gal Yisrael. We'll turn now to the top of page 160, Hashkivenu, beginning in Hebrew again, very top of page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim. Ushmor tzeteinu, uvoeinu, lechaim ulshalom, me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. As we turn to page 162 at the very top. V'shamarhu v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Einai beini uvein bnei Yisrael oti le'olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz uvayom hashevim Shabbat, Shabbat vayinafash. I invite us to rise in body or in spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 164. From that point on, we can continue silently, and as always, please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, if at the end you're still standing, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Ose shalom mimromav, uyase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru amen. Thank you, David. We're going to turn now to page 371 as we offer our Mishaberach, our healing prayer this evening. In a moment, I'll read our Mishaberach list, but of course, we'll continue to pray for the people in Turkey and in Syria, of course, still recovering from the horrible earthquakes, and also, of course, to the community in East Lansing, Michigan, after another terrible shooting at Michigan State University. So we extend our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts to all of them, as well as those in our community tonight who we're thinking of. And we are thinking of Bensi Tepper, Allison Luckman, Malka Bat Chaya Sura, Michael Klinghofer, Aimee Cass, Warren Cass, Rivka Bat Rachel, Leah Bat Naomi, Gedalia Ben Sylvia, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Sivia Devora Bat Francis, Muriel Hirsch, Michelle Sawicki, Francis Kirschman, Shelley Newmark, Diana Axelrod, Gabriella Spicer, Barbara Kushner, David Kyle Klopman, Lorraine Davis, Michoel Ben Chananya, Devora Bat Sima, Rebecca Snyder, Jeffrey Miller, Shelley Lyman, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Oren, Stanley Rappaport, Karen Layton, Debbie Bookvar, Carol Javna, Lori Nisanoff, Roberta Kyle, Miriam Batchaya, Dina Batchana, Mindy Cantor, Rebecca Rubin, Miriam Levy, Deborah and John Fogarty, and Kate Kessler. In addition to the names that I just read out loud, we'll invite those who are with us here tonight. If you have any additional names to share, we'll start on this side of the room and then work towards this side of the room. If you have names, just raise a hand so I make sure I get everybody. Go ahead. We'll join together in the middle of page 371. Misheberach avotenu Mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu Mekor habracha labotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So this week we read from Parshat Mishpatim, which is, look, one can argue about what is the most important of all of the Torah portions in the Torah. They're all the most important in many ways. But Parshat Mishpatim has an outsized impact because its name tells us what it's really principally about. Mishpat is matters really of justice, in particular matters of how did our ancestors, first in the desert and eventually imagining themselves in the land of Israel, decide and determine what was going to be the basis of their law. Now, one can consider many different parts of this parsha and apply it in many different ways. I imagine that some of you, knowing my interest in particular in what's going on in Israel, you might assume that would be my focus for tonight and what's going on in terms of the impact on the potential of legal reform that would change the character of the country. It is not my focus tonight, but I urge you all to be focused on that topic as much as you possibly can. Instead, I'm going to focus on an area which we are all very familiar with, but I want to put into something of a very specific light this evening, and one that actually hits closer to home for me, and I think for some of us in town in particular, but I'll explain what I mean by that in just a bit. Let's start with Torah first. So in the Parshat Mishpatim, beginning in chapter 22 of Exodus, verses 19 to 26, we get some familiar sounding verses, but ones that speak very loudly across the generations as to what it is our essential character as part of the Jewish people and what of our main foci of what it is that we are meant to do, what some of the most important instruction from God is related to. And it has to do with how we treat people, and in particular the people in our communities and in our countries and wherever it is that we may reside who need assistance beyond what they can provide for themselves. So it says as follows: "You shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Again, familiar territory. "Beyond that, you, the communal leaders, shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans." So first of all, right, we can understand, could have had a pasuk like this with the commandment that simply says, okay, do as you're instructed to do. But there is this added kola that tells you, if you don't act in a particular way, not only will I make your situation as theirs is, but I'm going to do it because I, God, will hear their cries calling out to me, and I will respond in kind. This happens to dovetail a little bit with what I'm going to focus on tomorrow, which is the laws of eye for an eye, as it's told, the Telion laws. But a conversation for tomorrow, you'll have to come back for that. But here again, the emphasis, right? Stranger, widow, orphan. Now, beyond that, if you should lend money to my people, in other words, to amongst the Israelites, to the poor amongst you in particular, do not act toward them as a creditor. Exact no interest from them. And if you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, in other words, as a guarantee of their working for you, you have an obligation to return it to them before the sun sets. Believe it or not, this was an ancient practice in which, for example, a person laboring under your charge during the day would leave their clothing with you, in essence, as a guarantee that they're going to finish the job and come back. Not so dissimilar to the way that people may leave a license or a credit card as a tab, in essence, knowing that you're going to come home. Except the problem here is this is assumed to be their only clothing. So if you don't return their clothing to them at the end of the night, if they didn't do a sufficient enough job, for example, and you feel like you've been slighted, you do not have the capacity for holding back this most basic thing for them, because literally the Torah tells us it is obvious, but it says it is what covers the skin, and it asks a rhetorical question: and what else shall your neighbor sleep? Okay, right? If you take literally the last thing from the poor person, their clothes, what will they sleep in? And therefore, God ends, if that person cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. So this is obviously a section that most of us are familiar with, at least in general terms. Obligation to certainly the stranger, to the widow, to the orphan. And I think also an awareness of the general responsibilities that we have to a large category, I will put in quotation marks, of poor. In other words, those that do not have enough on their own to sustain their financial life. We have obligations to them, and in particular, obligations not to take advantage of that position. Now, again, we may all assume this and read this, and we're reading it today in 2023, and say this is all self-evident, right? What is the necessity of commandments of this sort? These should be mandatory obligations of human beings. I can assure you that at the time in which these laws found their way into the world, they were radical ideas. Radical ideas. In terms of considering the obligation of a society to its people, in particular, the least well taken care of, they were considered at the time to be the most radical position you could possibly take. Even at the beginning of this week's portion, which is hard to read because it is laws about how to manage and to treat slaves, right? As hard as it is to imagine that scenario, believe it or not, even those laws would have been considered progressive for their time because they valued the human being who was still considered a slave beyond it. And principally, all of this is about, and this is where it really comes into focus, all of this is related to God. And God is watching, and God is responding, and responding forcefully if we do not heed this particular call and keep up with this particular obligation. So I want to fast forward in time for a second to what I think is something that takes this core idea and gives us an example of just how important it really, really is, in particular how we treat the poor, those who are in need of financial assistance, and how much that applies to our obligations as Jews. This comes in a much later conversation and the creation of something known as the Prose Bowl. Now, I'm guessing again, I'm just looking at Dave and Nicole. This might be the only people who are familiar with, and one of the only times I ever even heard the word as a kid growing up was that it was there was a joint program, I think, between JTS and List College, and kids in high school could go to this thing, and they called it the Prose Bowl. And as a kid, I thought they were talking about something like the Iron Bowl or the Super Bowl or something of the sort. And in fact, it is the opposite. It is a decision that was arrived at by Hillel the Elder. It is a combination, actually, of 3 Aramaic words that adds up to good for the poor and for the rich, in essence. And its principal idea was this. The laws of Shemitah, the laws that have to do with the 7th year, in which you have cycles of 7 years. In the 7th year, we mostly focus on the obligation to the natural world, leaving the fields to be laid fallow, not to seed them. Lots of important things in that way. But there are lots of laws related to Shemitah that actually have to do specifically with the poor. And one of the main orientations, the main ideas of the laws of Shemitah is to take care of the people who need the most assistance. Now, the problem is, in the law of the Shemitah, in the 7th year, there's one other thing that's supposed to happen that is supposed to be the most beneficial to the poor, which is a release of all debts. Any debts that are held are released in that 7th year. One just has to take 2 seconds of logical thinking to realize that there are some problems with that model, because what inevitably happened in real life in the land of Israel when Shemitah was in effect is that the wealthiest of the community, who normally would be lending, again, at no interest, right, lending out to the poorest to be able to allow them to sustain themselves, once you got to the 6th year, stopped lending. And even sometimes to the 5th year, stopped lending, because they knew in a matter of a year or so, they were going to lose all of it because the debts would be forgiven. So what does Rabbi Hillel come up with? He comes up with a scenario in which the Beit Din, which is a collection of rabbis that constitutes a rabbinic court, Beit Din operates outside of the laws of Shemitah. They're allowed to collect and to disperse funds in ways that the average person is not able to. So what would essentially happen is, let's say the person offering credit, right, the individual who has, let's say, a deal, let's say very unlikely scenario, I lent money to Jerry, right? I'm holding on to this credit, and it comes to be this last year. The credit shifts over to the Beit Din, and the Beit Din takes care of the collections and the consideration. And so while on the one hand you might say to yourself, well, that seems terrible. Now we've undone the freedom that the Shemitah gives. It's not quite that. It essentially reopens the ability, again, for creditors to be able to offer funds, and for people, creditees, I'm losing my track here, but basically both sides of the equation to continue to operate. Now you'll say to yourself, why, Rabbi, are we talking about any of this? What does that have to do with all the things you talked about before? It's a rare example in which a law that is very specific in the Torah, right? In your 7th year, debts are forgiven. Generally speaking, the rabbis are not in real interest to violate or to roll back or to create loopholes for Torah law, especially Torah law that is very clearly written. But in the end, what Rabbi Hillel looks at, Hillel the Elder, to give him credit, looks at and says is whatever the law in its original inception, in practical terms, the poor are worse off than they were before. So what they have to do is to find a way not to undo God's law, but to find a way around it, in essence, a loophole that will allow for the continuation of money in this particular year. Why? With only one particular purpose: to take care of and to make sure that the poor have what they need to survive. So all of this is relevant in every age. It's relevant in our age as much as anything. Why did I say that this has a sort of particular element for, I'll say me personally, but I think for some people who have lived in Sag Harbor and know Sag Harbor well? A couple of weeks ago, a really very lovely person named Pedro passed away. Pedro is somebody who you might have seen around town but never knew his name. He was, in effect, really the only known homeless person who lived in Sag Harbor. And he lived here since, I'm told actually, almost since the 80s. Came here to play soccer and sort of found himself here, and a series of things, as happens to many people who are without a home, found himself on the streets. And while many people tried to help him over the years, many things Pedro did made it impossible for him to really find a way to a consistent home. But he walked around the village. He knew every person, he talked to everybody. And as it turns out, he told me once that he's of Cuban ancestry, and he found out that actually part of his family is Jewish. That is not an uncommon story, actually, especially in Cuba. that there is a not insignificant population of people of mixed parentage or of a different background altogether, coming from much, much earlier, in which he knew and had a sense of his identity. But again, lived every single day, cold, warm, whatever it might have been, was generally speaking somewhere in Sag Harbor. And as I said, many of us, without any ill intention, right, may have walked past him a million times. And I think, for me, I think about it constantly. What more could I have done for him? Not that I could have. Not that I could have solved his problems. Not that I could have helped him necessarily to overcome his challenges. But more, certainly more. And I think that this story, this experience of this one person is emblematic of a much larger reality for all of us, which is there is a shocking number of people in this world who still live not just below the poverty line, but below where even the line is visible, who make so little, who have so little to sustain themselves, that it is heartbreaking to say the least, but from a Torah perspective is a negligence really on our collective parts. And I don't say this expecting that there is some simple solution. Smarter people than I certainly have given a tremendous amount of time and energy and financial resources to solve the problems of homelessness and of poverty and of hunger. It's not to say that we haven't tried, but I think amongst the many priorities that we as individuals in a shared world, but we as the Jewish community of Sag Harbor and frankly of this country, I think that we need to begin to push this back up a little further on our priority list, to be much more engaged, I think, in the act of feeding and clothing and providing homes for those who cannot afford those things on their own. And I think, as we all know, the world is getting more expensive by the moment, this part of the world in particular. This kind of poverty is not always the person like Pedro on the street. Many people who have technically a home, but who struggle for the most basic necessities. And I think that as I studied this week's portion and as I prepared for tonight, and the more I see and think about in the Torah of all the commandments, all of the mitzvot, all of the expectations that God places upon us, how often and how repeated the obligations are to the stranger, to the widow, to the orphan, and to those who are financially destitute. There are many laws, many pertaining to idolatry, many pertaining to Shabbat, many pertaining to kashrut, many of them. But few are as repeated as these, and few offer the kind of description that God gives in this paragraph as to what God's response will be when we fail, when we don't live up to our charge. To say that God places an emphasis here is to diminish it. I think, quite frankly, everything is based upon these moral, ethical, and values-based mitzvot, the ones that tell us who we are and what we really are a part of. And I think for me, as I studied this portion, I hope that all of us will go home tonight and think a little bit more deeply about these mitzvot and about these commandments, and to think, even if it is a small thing, even if it's incremental, if it's volunteering one time during a year when you otherwise wouldn't have, if it's writing that one check that you might not have been able to, even if it's for a few dollars, if it's just bringing a little bit of extra change in your pocket as you're walking through the streets of New York City, right? It's even just giving the dignity of saying hello to the person that you pass on the street in Sag Harbor. Each of these things, I think, are significant and collectively can be world-changing, life-changing. So I think in Pedro's memory, I will certainly say for myself, I'm going to try to do more. It won't solve all the problems, but hopefully it will help make what is really a terrible scourge at least a little bit less, and I hope that you will join me in trying to think of ways to act as well. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll invite us to turn back in our prayer books to page 586, and we'll rise as we get again to page 586 at the bottom of the page, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol, Latet Gedula Leotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoye Ha'aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishbechot Adama, שלא סמך חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Now invite those in mourning, those observing yahrzeit, to please remain standing. Everyone else at this time may be seated. We think first of those who've passed in our community in recent months: Martin Blake, Arlene Eber, Sandy Greenwald, Jane Beard Cass, Gertrude Katz, Dorothy Klein, Buddy Kossoff, Helene Krotman, Emmanuel Kiprios, David Lieberman, Sandra Luongo, Norma Paulsek, Marvin Schreier, Anita Sheldon, Alan Silver, Sandy Slip, Larry Wartor, Rita Weitzman, and Yael Zerdar. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Gustav Amsterdam, Vala Amsterdam, Sam Berman, Estelle Eagle, Ira Flesch, Rose Goldberg, Barry Goodstadt, Sarah Harkaveh, Mildred Hellman, Roberta Herbert, Philip Idone, Joseph Jonas, Frank Levitt, Warren Levy, Gail Ann Lowe Maidman, Myrna Massoff, Harry Matlis, Theodore Meyer, Edma Moody, Lee Harris Pomeroy, Gady Press, Nettie Rosenstein, Fanny Rosenthal, Marilyn Rudley, David Senf, Mary Slinger, Marcus Spitz, Ben Woloshin, and Sigmund Zimmerman. In addition to the names that we just shared, is anyone else saying Kaddish for anyone we didn't mention? And we'll invite those that are with us, if you so choose, to rise. Invite the mourners to join with me on page 598. Yitkadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich machutei. B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach la'alam u'li'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shemei dekudsha berichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Please have a seat, and just some quick announcements. First, of course, is to join us for Shabbat services tomorrow morning. If you'd like to join us in person, just a reminder that we'll be in the chapel here at the Old Whalers, so you enter around the side of the building. Also, a reminder that the temple office will be closed this Monday for President's Day, and there are no classes on Monday as well, so my Heschel class won't be meeting. I believe, though, that Friday's class will take place, but everything else, I believe, for the rest of the week is not happening, so no Hebrew school and no Musar as well. However, this Sunday, March 19th, our Rosh Chodesh Women's Group will be meeting in person and virtually. You can contact Ellen Ruby for more information if you'd like to join. Also, Tuesday, February 21st at 7 o'clock, the Temple Anti-Semitism Committee will be having its regular meeting. You're welcome to contact the office to either join the group or to join that particular meeting if you'd like. Also, a reminder, speaking of our conversation earlier, Sunday, February 26th, Maureen's Haven Shelter will be taking place, and as always, we're looking for volunteers to help out as well. I realized in looking at our notes, I meant this Sunday, February 19th, not March 19th, by the way. Didn't skip that far ahead. Also, just some good news from the building this week. The electricity was connected by our local utilities, so we're very happy about that. There's very, very good stuff, and walls are going up. I'm told floors, I think, are going down on the first floor, on the top floor, sanctuary floor, sometime very soon, I think this week or next. And also just a heads up that there is going to be another article, I believe, in one of the magazines, Sag Harbor Magazine, Press Groups Magazine. They're doing something on the stained glass windows in particular. So they've been working, Riblin gave them a whole bunch of pictures, and they're doing something, should be really lovely. So another great thing to look out for in the news, which is great. And on another note, we got several new members in the pipeline, which has also been really great. And Hebrew School is great. And we were just looking, actually, we sent to Ron and Alan this week that we have, I think it's actually 11 B'nai Mitzvah between, the middle of April and I think September or something like that, which is a really wonderful, and these are great, great kids, great kids. I can't tell you of all the privileges of my job. This is really they're all wonderful. They're all wonderful, but this is like a great group, and they're, after years of having to manage with Zoom and stuff like that, seeing them all together right now and seeing that kind of community that they build is really very sweet. So a lot of good things, and also just to say, believe it or not, as I think we're already starting to plan for the summer, and we got a lot of great stuff coming up. So, good things, everybody. Good things for sure. With that, last thing, just to remind everybody, when you leave here, if you can, just to bring your prayer books back with you to Bob and Josie on the way out. And we'll close our service. Wait, did I miss anything? Ron, anything to announce? Right? There's no board meetings, nothing, I don't think. So we'll conclude our service. We mostly do this on Saturday mornings, but I'm going to do it tonight because I love it. On page 628, 628 at the very top of the page, is a wonderful piyut known as Yigdal. And if you know the melody, you're welcome to join with. Yigdal Elohim Chai v'yishtabach nimtza v'yehet el metziuto echad ve'en yachid keyechudo ne'lam v'gam ein sof le'achduto en lo demut haguf ve'eino guf lo na'aroch elav kedushato kadmon lechol davar asher nivra rishon ve'en reshit le'reshito ino adon olam lechol notzar Yoreh gedulato malchuto shefa nevuato netanoel anshe segulato vetifarto lo kam be'Yisrael kemo shehod Avihu mabit et munato Torah met natan le'amoel al yad nevi'o neman beito O ya Khalifael velo yamir dato le'olamim lezulato sofev yodea setareinu mabit lesof davar bekadmato gomer liish chesed kemifalo noten l'rasha ra kerishato Ishlach l'ketz yamin pedut olam kol chai v'yesh yakir yeshuato chaye olam nata betocheinu baruch adei ahad shem tehilato chaye olam nata betocheinu baruch adei ahad shem tehilato. Thank you, David. I knew I was going to get some back up, but just so that you don't think that you're they changed, the Reform Prayer Book changes the last stanza. So if it sounds off, it's not you, it's the book. So, okay. Kiddush is on page 123, and we'll rise again, page 123. Don't forget on your way out to grab some challah from Bob and Josie. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabahat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh bereshit ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim Ki v'hanu v'charta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim ve'shabat kodshecha ve'ahava uvratzon inchaltanu baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha'shabbat. Amen. Okay, l'chaim everybody. Motzi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. See you soon. Good Shabbos. God, I can't imagine everybody has to listen to me chew into this microphone. It's terrible. Just terrible.